the socialists that you know, you'll see that they're scared to death of life. They're afraid of life. They're not really successes at anything. And they've got to be supported. They've got to be taken care of. To put it very bluntly, somebody has to change their diapers constantly so that they can live in this world. Otherwise, according to the laws of nature, they would not. Marx and Engels, ladies and gentlemen, derived their belief that the Negro stood outside of history and was incapable of contributing to civilization from Hegel. You know Hegel. I've discussed him many times on this broadcast. And if you want really a true assessment of socialism, Hegel and all of these people who have brought this into the world, this vile philosophy into the world, read a book by Leonard Peikoff called, well, I'll tell you what, I'm not going to give you that right now, because I want to talk about that at length on another night. We just may go back to Peikoff and cover it in a lot more depth than we ever had before. Hegel did not, of course, descend to the mean and nasty abuse which characterized his two revolutionary followers, Marx and Engels. But what he had to say was harshly condemnatory and based on skimpy evidence. The gist of it was this, that the Negro, quote, exhibits the natural man in his completely wild and untamed state, end quote. He believed that the Negroes of Africa were incapable of religion, but were rather sorcerers who imagined that with their fetishes they could command the forces of nature. The Negro race, Hegel continued, has, and I quote, perfect contempt for humanity. Tyranny is regarded as no wrong, and cannibalism is looked upon as quite customary and proper. Parents sell their children, and conversely children their parents, as either has the opportunity. The polygamy of the Negroes has frequently for its object the having of many children to be sold, every one of them into slavery, and very often naive complaints on this score are heard, as for instance in the case of a Negro in London who lamented that he was now quite a poor man because he had already sold all his relations. Slavery is in and for itself injustice, for the essence of humanity is freedom. But for this, man must be matured. The gradual abolition of slavery is therefore wiser and more equitable than its sudden removal. At this point, we leave Africa, not to mention it again, for it is no historical part of the world. It has no movement or development to exhibit, end quote. Marx and Engels apparently accepted Hegel's conclusions about the relationship of the Negro world to civilization, although they obviously did not relate the ahistoric condition of the Negro world to a lack of consciousness of God. Hegel himself is unclear, and probably deliberately so, about the reasons for the Negro being frozen, as he sees it, in the savage and brutish state of natural man. Marx, ladies and gentlemen, actually championed Negro slavery. He spent a large part of his life writing diatribes against fellow revolutionaries who had the impudence to differ with him. When Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, probably the leading socialist thinker in France at the time, published a book called The Philosophy of Poverty, Marx immediately replied with a vitriolic rebuttal entitled The Poverty of Philosophy, 1847. Proudhon had been childish enough to advocate the emancipation of the Negro slaves in the United States, and Marx answered contemptuously with this, quote, without slavery, North America, the most progressive of countries, would be transformed into a patriarchal country. Wipe out North America from the map of the world, and you will have anarchy, the complete decay of modern commerce and civilization. Abolish slavery, and you will have wiped America off the map of nations. End quote. What Marx was saying, ladies and gentlemen, in effect, was that the Negro slaves were needed to produce raw cotton. Cotton was the basic raw material of modern capitalist industry. Therefore, Negro slavery was necessary to the survival of America and to the survival of modern civilization. The first thing that is interesting about the quoted paragraph is that Marx again makes it abundantly clear that he has no interest whatsoever in the fate or welfare of Negroes. Never did. He hated them. The second point of interest is his preposterous predictions. If slavery were abolished, America would become a patriarchal country. What does that mean? A nation of primitive shepherds, perhaps like the tribes of the Old Testament patriarchs? Evidently, Marx actually believed that emancipation would wipe America off the map of the world. America would cease to exist as a nation. For a reasonably well-educated man to make this sort of a judgment in the year 1847 is absolutely incomprehensible. Alexis de Tocqueville had published his great work on the United States called Democracy in America between 1835 and 1840. Marx could have read there, we don't know if he did or not, but he could have, quote, "The inhabitants of the United States constitute a great civilized people, which fortune has placed in the midst of an uncultivated country, at a distance of 3,000 miles from the central point of civilization. America consequently stands in daily need of European trade. The American will no doubt ultimately succeed in producing or manufacturing at home most of the things which they require, but the two continents can never be independent of each other. So numerous are the natural ties which exist between their wants, their ideas, their habits, and their manners." Here, Marx's prediction that the United States would become a patriarchal society with de Tocqueville's more or less contemporary view of the American future. And I quote again, "There are, at the present time, two great nations in the world which seem to tend toward the same end, although they started from different points. I allude to the Russians and the Americans. Both of them have grown up unnoticed, and whilst the attention of mankind was directed elsewhere, they have suddenly assumed a most pronounced place amongst the nations, and the world learned their existence and their greatness at almost the same time. All other nations seem to have nearly reached their natural limits, and only to be charged with the maintenance of their power. But these two are still in the act of growth. All the others are stopped, or continue to advance with extreme difficulty. These are proceeding with ease and with celerity along a path to which the human eye can assign no term. The American struggles against the natural obstacles which oppose him. The adversaries of the Russian are men. The former combats the wildness and savage life, the latter civilization with all its weapons and its arts. The conquests of the one are therefore gained by the plowshare, those of the other by the sword. The Anglo-American relies upon personal interest to accomplish his ends, and gives free scope to the unguided exertions and common sense of the citizens. The Russian centers all the authority of society in a single arm. The principal instrument of the former is freedom, of the latter servitude. Their starting point is different, and their courses are not the same, yet each of them seems to be marked out by the will of heaven to sway the destinies of half the globe." End quote. Can you imagine that Alexis de Tocqueville said that in 1835, between 1835 and 1840, and is still that way today, ladies and gentlemen? And the greatest conflict that is raging in the world is between the philosophy of freedom in America and of servitude in Russia. Even now, he called it. He called it at that time. And it is true today. This contrast in prophecy speaks for itself, and it absolutely needs no commentary. Gentlemen, did you know that not only did Marx hate Negroes, blacks, whom he called niggers, idiots. But he hated Slavs. He hated what he called the common man, or the masses, the great stupid herd of animals, as he referred to them. But he also hated his own people. You see, Marx was a Jew, and he hated Jews with a passion. There are few aspects of Karl Marx's character that are more contemptible than his ferocious attacks on Jews and on Judaism at a time when anti-Semitism was still rife in Europe and massacres of Jews were a recent memory. Although Marx was of pure Jewish descent on both sides, he consistently repudiated or was silent concerning his origin. As Sir Isaiah Berlin puts it, quote, "The fact that he was a Jew, neither he nor Engels ever mentions. His references to individual Jews, particularly in his letters to Engels, are virulent to a degree. His origin had become a personal stigma which he was unable to avoid pointing out in others." End quote. You see, this man was sick. Karl Marx was mentally ill. He was destitute of spirit. It's almost as if he had no soul. And maybe he didn't. The socialist custodians of Marx's hate-brimmed correspondence suppressed or embellished those letters which cast their hero in an unsavory light. They eliminated the language of gutter anti-Semitism which came so naturally to both Marx and Engels. You see, the history of socialism is mostly a fraud, a counterfeit. They never tell the truth about anything. And they all know that they're lying. I don't even know how they can live with each other. Or look